Welcome to Endtalkers. I'm Elioaux Faucheron.
I'm Niniri Niri.
And today we continue our journey into Garlemald.
Yeah, it's exciting, depressing, all the emotional notes of Final Fantasy XIV.
And especially Endwalker as a whole.
Definitely.
So, picking up where we left off, the twins and the Warrior of Light are returning from Camp Broken Glass after the death of the Garlean children.
Yes, they are. This is really the turning point, one of two turning points, perhaps, of the Garlemald sort of arc of Endwalkers for me. The point at which we are really left to grapple with the complexity of the situation. And world-ending catastrophe besides, we see I think more intimately than we've ever seen before, the price of what has been happening back home while we've been dealing with, gods and with the calamities and all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah, the way that the story's told and the way that the Garleans, the way that the entirety of their society that up until this point has only been hinted at and the complexity there within is laid bare. We are provided a nuanced, not necessarily hitherto apparent between likes of characters like Xenos and the other Garleans that we fought that are inherently antagonistic, and those who are inherently sympathetic, like Maxima, Lucia. And we get those that are in between. And we get, as throughout this part of the story, especially, we get also the feelings and thoughts and the breadth of feelings and thoughts of the civilians and not just the military itself. Because if you only judge, and not even judge, but if you only understand a civilization based on its military, you're going to have a very, very specific perspective on it.
Right, exactly. It's going to be terribly, terribly skewed. I think this is a path they've been walking since 2.0. I think, they start the path sort of tentatively with the revelations of Lucia in Heavensward, perhaps even the bodyguard of Canisena. Perhaps that was even the first sort of arrow strung. And they build to it. They introduce collaborators as people in the form of Fordola, and even in 2.0 they introduce us to Ironvold, who's half Garlean, of course. Then in Stormblood they hit us with Maxima, who's a virtuous Garlean, and now they're really, obviously we didn't see a huge amount of it outside of further collaborators in Shadowbringer, because that wasn't the focus, but
the Populares.
Yeah, exactly. The Populares and the Children of Gaius, who are, Garlean-ish, socially Garlean,
yes,
culturally Garlean. And then now we see the civilians in Endwalker, and it really, I almost think of it as the anvil upon which they will, and there are thousands of these sort of examples, but as one of the anvils upon which they will later hammer home the message that our greatest tool is our empathy.
Very well put. And there's 2 points I want to hit on from that, one of which is, I think, and you got right at the end, I think you really got to, which is they forge the purpose, the meaning, the weapon, the story that they want to tell through 1,000 narratives that string into one powerful chord, rather than a single piece of, if I'm being unkind, sophistry or platitude, right? Like, having one character speak about why something is good is very different than having many people with different perspectives that all tie into one overarching meaning. The other thing I wanted to touch on is, to everything you just said, is Gaius himself, and the way in which, you have Gaius from 1.0 and 2.0, and then you have Gaius throughout 3.0 on. But the thing that I really like is understanding, and we'll get onto this with Quintus later too, but Gaius isn't discount Darth Vader the way that he gets coded during 2.0. And it's not that, he's changed so much during 3.0, or like, he's fully redeemed. If you look at Gaius during the time of 3.0 onwards, he is actually very much a very similar character with a better understanding of the world. His ideology around strength comes from a deep desire for people to be at peace, and is a byproduct of being Garlean and growing up in that society. And you see Quintus actually state very similar things to what Gaius said. But the difference is that Gaius doesn't have the same type of cruelty and utter dispassion for people themselves. And it's not that he isn't villainous or flawed, but there's a reason he commands love and respect from his troops, for instance, in A Realm Reborn. And
Right.
so there is nuance even as early as A Realm Reborn, but especially because of how he's coded and how the Garleans are our direct enemies and we are the ones being attempted to be conquered by them, that nuance very easily gets completely overshadowed, especially also because some of his supporting cast is just capital E, like either capital E either or capital B batshit crazy.
Right, exactly. So there is no such thing as a benevolent imperialism, obviously.
Right.
But Gaius, I don't mean to say but in addition to that, Gaius is a damn sight better than the other Legati that we meet. He does have a moral code, and this is stated in Encyclopedia Eorzean 1. It's stated in 2.0. I don't think they've learned how to fully show it at that point, that they do later on.
Yes. I think it is worth articulating that there is a respectability to sincerity and well-meaning belief in what is best for people, even if it's fundamentally wrong, even if it, I do not mean respect in condonement. I do not respect in, there's something slightly good. I just mean that there's something that I can respect about someone who's sincere about their beliefs rather than says what they believe and does not in any way practice it. And so the fact that he is ideologically consistent is a thing that I can respect, even if I think he's utterly wrong and what he's doing is ultimately cruel.
Yes, I agree with you. I definitely think so. There are multiple Legati that are just bad. I don't want to say evil. Valen's probably is evil actually, with capital E. But stuff like Gaius, and I think you could probably claim less of, but still a sort of respectability, not in a moral sense, but in a but it's a Japanese game, right? So if you were to think of it as, the Japanese adoration of certain warrior ideals of honor, then, like regular Gaius, these sorts of characters do have, from that viewpoint, a certain respectability.
The strong must lead is very much that you could look to something from the Shogunate era or just a lot of the Bushido's eras, right? And I don't mean that necessarily I know that that's a kind of a loaded statement historically, but just the eras between the Sengoku and Edo period. There is, I think, a running theme of the strong must lead.
Yes, yeah, and lead virtuously.
Mm-hmm.
Which, again, I'm not saying, if you ask most Animegans, they probably don't think Gaius, and with validity, obviously, they probably don't think Gaius led virtuously, but from a comparative standpoint.
Yes. Well, and what I think is important about it is and I did not realize this until I rewatched the scenes, I think more than once, but Quintus echoes in a similar ideology to Gaius in such a way that why that's important is because you understand it's a part of the Garlean mentality. Quintus says a line later on, which I thought was really fascinating, which is their only defense was, I forget what the line exactly is, but to conquer, basically, and that he is wrong and full of shit. But when you understand that, you then understand how the entire populace is not just tricked, but tricked into thinking that way, and why they would follow that line of reasoning.
Yeah, it's definitely understandable. I mean, having an Ascian on the throne aside, obviously that can't be underestimated as an influencing factor. It's huge. It's risen empires before and directed them into their own forms of despotism, but including this specific Ascian, obviously, including Solus Emmet. But it's not. In fact, it's not at all difficult to see how they arrived at that conclusion.
Yeah, and before moving on, the one thing I'll say is flash forward, right? And you have Quintus's final line. He's alone. He's not talking to anybody else. He's talking to himself right before he's about to kill himself. and he speaks to the Garlean flag and speaks of a beautiful dream that they shared of prosperity, and like he sincerely does, whether he's full of shit for a lot of different reasons, he clearly does think that in a more cruel way that peace can never happen, and peace is only leads to other people dominating you. But he does want prosperity. And that is interesting, even if he is maybe one of my most hated characters in the entirety of 14.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's a disturbingly realistic character, Quintus. I think his rhetoric, his thought is mirrored in real life in disturbing ways.
So we have the Scions all speaking around the command table at Camp Broken Glass with the Oslibardian contingent. And we get a recap of the Civil War, which we've already talked about in a prior episode. So don't necessarily need to walk all the way back over that. But we get an understanding of the events that lead to the Civil War, why the First and the Third are fighting each other, how Fandaniel, through the money of his house, was funding both sides, how Xenos was stoking the flame by killing anyone who started to have any kind of little bit of seed of power.
It's interesting to look at it from the top down. We knew these things were happening to a degree, but it's almost double-edged, right? The influence of the Brutus Funds and of Xenos, who of course can just walk into anywhere and just kill anyone he wants because he's that powerful. It's a very compelling sort of side to it, but at the same time, Garlemald was a tinderbox. You see this here, right? You see it with the Doman Civil War, the Civil War that happened around the same time as the Doman Uprising. This was not post-Solus a stable nation, which is very Roman, obviously. I mean, Rome, at least until the Byzantine era, very rarely had hereditary succession. It was coups and assassinations as a succession method, with exceptions, of course. But there's a clear inspiration there, I think, and it tells you what you need to know about Garlemald and how, even without our and Xenos' intervention, this nation, it wasn't on a good path.
No. Had Varys had more time to concrete the totality of his rule, it might have been able to be more stable, but it was still a tinderbox after the prior War of Succession. So yeah, you're totally right there.
And even without succession wars, we see multiple Legatus trying to set up sort of provinces as breakaway nations.
Yeah.
So even under Varys' rule, obviously this with that, I think Garlemald was, and also thematically is, soulless. They represent very similar sort of ethoses or perhaps traumas to Emmett, or to the persona that Emmett presented to these people.
The other thing that was interesting to me about this cutscene is kind of more related to production, but there are a lot of cutscenes in Endwalker, but a lot of them are very long, 15 minutes plus, which is crazy to me, especially because of how much of them are voiced. But it was really noticeable in contrast to if you use the Unending Journey and watching A Realm Reborn cutscenes. You'll often have what could have been a 15-minute cutscene in A Realm Reborn cut up into 4 different segments that are all like 4 minutes, right?
Right.
Versus Endwalker, which often has one cutscene as one long thing.
Yeah, I mean, some of the would be considered mid-length cutscenes now would be given almost one of those warnings that says you have to sit there and watch this for a long time. Back in 2.0, it's the games. There's definitely a lineage there. Obviously, I mean, sort of meta textually, there's a lineage there, and sort of production wise, there's a lineage, but they do feel very different. I mean, we have come so far with the game.
We really have, and then it's exciting to see what the future is, because even if the future is a plateau, like that's, at least for now, good enough for me. In terms of like the amount of voice acting and cutscene length that we get. Another factoid that I really, really love is they reference Varys talking to the Tempered in their dreams. And why I really like that is because we know Varys gets used for anima, and anima in 10 is tied to the Faith, and the Faith are dreaming, and there's a whole like theme and symbology around dreams there. So I really love that is kind of used as a touchstone.
Oh, hugely. I love 10. I'm not as huge on 10 as some other people are. Perhaps,
Like me.
yeah, perhaps other people in this chat. But I do love 10. I think 10's an amazing game. And I think its narrative is incredible. But I'm always glad to see callbacks to 10. In fact, I'm always glad to see callbacks to every Final Fantasy game, but 10 particularly because it hasn't had such a robust sort of base of illusions that have been made. Sort of, 10, 13, outside of Monster models because they reuse those. But these are games that aren't discussed quite so much.
Well, and you know what I think part of it is? I think you look at the way that 3 gets used a lot. And I think what happened is that the people who worked on 14, Yoshi P and crew, a lot of them grew up playing 3. A lot of them grew up playing those. And so they are referencing what inspired them. But a lot of people on the 14 team, some of them worked on 10. So they were never going to be inspired by 10 as so much as, or inspired in the way in which you read a book as a child and it sticks in your psyche, right?
Yeah.
There hasn't been enough time. I mean, we're getting 20 years now, but so we're getting to a point where there's been enough time. But there hadn't been enough time that a lot of the leading figures on 14 could have been deeply inspired by it. And I think that's part of why we're getting illusions, but not as driven, right? We don't have a crystal tower, right? Like we don't have what would be a good, I can't even think of a good thing. But okay, wait, actually I just had an idea. Imagine like a Mount Gagazet on Air Slate.
Be cool. I think we will get something of we will get a 10 illusion, a more clear 10 illusion. I would just say I nearly doubled over and went oof when you said 20 years. That can't be right.
I know, right? I literally said to myself this morning, or I think I said it in the Discord, it's been 20 years since I last played Final Fantasy V, and I'm like, that's not a number. That's not real.
No.
Oh man, but yeah, didn't 2001, right? So it's been more than 20 years since Final Fantasy X can drink.
Oh my god, that's right.
Oh god. Oh no.
You know what's crazy? 13 is 13 years old.
Oh Jesus. No, 13 came out on the Xbox 360, which is the newest console.
Yeah, definitely, right? The PS2. I love playing on my PS2. I'm listening to Weezer.
The talk of anima also makes me think of how they refer to the radio warding the primal tempering as a byproduct of accident. Not necessarily that they intentionally created the radios to ward, but that they have the same ability as a warding scale.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting. I mean, like, there are things to make about it thematically, right? Like the idea of huddling around a radio and it providing comfort and preventing, like, I think there's loose, tentative connections that you can look to it as sort of interesting. But it seems so strange to me that, yes, the thing we used for radios ends up being the same as warding scales. Like, I'm perfectly fine for it to be a hand wave. Like, I'm glad it exists, but it's also a little weird.
I wonder if that was a cheeky little joke from Emmett.
Oh, we know that he was on the forefront of Machina creation and definitely would have been likely the person to have invented that in the first place. That makes sense. I could get behind that as a theory.
Yeah, he wants. I mean, it all it really takes is for he would have been aware of Bahamut, right? Back in the day, Prime Bahamut, he would have seen that. So he probably would be aware that there are primals out there like strong enough that one could just fly into Garlemald City. He probably would be aware of primals that are strong enough to just fly into a city, destroy its defenses, and start tempering its people. So he might have a reason to, although he wasn't necessarily invested in the long-term stability of Garlemald so much as he was the ability of it to bring about a calamity, but still he might have been sort of cognizant of this risk. This is just me going wildly off script here, but and building that into sort of a failsafe or a protection. Or it could have just also been him being like, I'm mischievous.
Yeah, and yet one more thing, which is it also could have been a little bit of his self-destructive tendency, right? The creating something that might have been used as a weapon against him. He has a line in Shadowbringers, right? Which he has laid with our kind. He has done all these things, and he has found us wanting. Implies that at some point in Garlemald's history, he was genuinely trying to connect to humanity. He was, to some level, genuinely trying to gauge the value of people, which means to some extent he must have at some point somewhat valued people to some extent. And the idea that he would give them creations that might provide defense or comfort is not...
Yeah.
It's not against his character.
No, it's not. I mean, I would imagine... So the way I read that is that... I mean, he tells us, right, that he's lived 1,000 lives. I imagine that to be true. I imagine that although he spent time, engineering calamities and stuff like that, I would imagine that he lived as a farmer, as like as a small folk, to use a Game of Thrones term, 1,000 times. He lived as he's lived every life essentially.
I would also point out that both Encyclopedia Eorzea, but almost in all cases when referring to like general populace, will use small folk as a term. So actually, I think
That's
you're right
true.
on the money there.
Yeah. So I think that he has lived these 1,000 lives, and I think that the view that I get from him is not that he thinks that we're not people. He does, and he mentions that he sees the value in us, but it's just so petty to what he had in Aetheris.
So after we get our conversation about the radios to begin with, which also ends up becoming foreshadowing for later with how the radios get used, but we get the introduction to what I would argue is probably the most important character, at least definitely the most new character for this section, and that is Jullus.
Yes, I think you have... in fact, I think that trio, that sort of quadro, that's not the word, but the group, if you include us, of Alisaie, Alphinaud, Jullus, and us, as a audience standard, so I don't necessarily consider us 100% for this, but this trio carries the arc, which is not to say that the rest of it isn't good, isn't excellent, but they are the emotional heart of the arc, which is so important. And Jullus especially is a really wonderful character. I like that he doesn't just, we don't just jump in front of a bear to save him and he turns to sort of, work with us. We have to confront the spoils of empire alongside him. We have to deal with how it's going to be changed, how it has changed, the trauma that both sides feel from each other, and we have to fight alongside each other.
And the important, and to double down on that, right, is that it serves two functions, because it proves just how much that is not only ingrained, and the amount that he has suffered has ingrained it in him, but it also proves that as hard fought, as warming, I don't want to say warming his heart, because that's not really accurate in any way, but melting the cold ice of his experience, the hard-won victory of that is earned, and it's proved possible. So it's not only that this is a victory when we get to that point, but that it is something that no fight, that while some fights might be intractable, it doesn't mean that every fight that seems intractable should be conceded with immediately.
Yes. Yeah. Now, just remind me, Jullus, does he ever call us like a savage? I kind of don't think he does.
I don't know if he does. The people around him do.
Yes, they do.
Not just Quintus, but like other people as well. Like there's one person later who is... We'll get to that. But the... And he might in text, because I wasn't able to recheck all of the cutscenes with gameplay because of not having New Game Plus yet.
Right,
but
of course.
I do not believe he uses that term, but he gets perilously close to using the term race traders when referring to Lucia and Maxima when he first meets them.
Yeah. So I almost see a different kind of ingrained fanaticism within Jullus. Like, it's showing us how, although all of the people of Garlemald have been affected in some way by propaganda, each of them has sort of taken it in a different way. Julius's perception, which is very much rooted in the sort of the Garlean core philosophy, is very, very central to the it's us or them mindset. Whereas certain other characters do have that, but they almost have, we are superior to them, so it should be us.
Yeah, there's a big difference between... One, you also get a lot of that in Tertium as a whole with its side quests, But I think you're totally right because, and you know what I think the proof in the pudding is for that is that the proof in the pudding way. The fact that the fact that you look at how he eventually can concede to the empathy and the compassion offered to him, and the way in which Quintus can't, because it's not that he doesn't believe you will offer compassion in this moment. He believes he will be put under your boot and heel inevitably, even if he does, right? I don't think Quintus necessarily thinks he's going to be clapped in irons the second he enters Camp Broken Glass, but I do believe he thinks that no matter what, eventually the Garleans will be subjugated. Their third eye will be seen as a mark of shame. Like, he doesn't believe peace is worth a chance, and it will only inevitably lead to conflict again. So what's the point? And therefore,
Yeah.
he must stick with his ideals. And that's very different to what Jullus, clearly believes.
Yeah, Jullus is very invested, and this is not to say that Quintus is not, but Jullus is very invested, obviously, in the safety of his family, of his people, whereas Quintus almost abstracts that out to. He doesn't even necessarily view it on such a personal level. He thinks of it in a philosophical way. He thinks of conflict as the core of people. Although he probably doesn't think that even he will live to see this resubjugation of the Garleans. He may not even think that. He may think that his grandchildren will be the first ones to see that, or their children. But he believes fundamentally in such a cynical view of the world and of its people.
And that's it, to the heart of it, right? We've talked about nihilism throughout Endtalkers, but it's just, he is so cynical, and not even in not in a general way, not in cynical can be used in a lot of different contexts when in just regular speech, but I mean just definitionally, utterly incapable by choice of any form of optimism or belief in giving something a chance, especially if, and this ends up tying with other broader themes of Endwalker, right? But it's that if conflict will inevitably come again, there's no point in peace. As opposed to thinking conflict may come again, but the struggle is to try to make a better world, and to maintain that better world is always of value and worth it, not just conceding to it and being the top dog.
We've all been at that point, right, where we've... This is a stupid analogy, but where we've... Because it's been on my mind lately, where we've been doing a Dark Souls boss or an Elden Ring boss, and it's like, oh god, what's the point? I'll never get it. Or where we've been seeing a really long journey, we've been grinding out a YouTube channel trying to make it successful, and sometimes your mind thinks, oh, what's the point? I'll never get there. Jullus thinks in that same sort of frustrated, cynical mindset, but all the time, and about the world itself, almost.
Yeah, the difference between Jullus and Quintus, absolutely. And that's the thing, though, right? Is you can, if the world can show you that it can be better, that there is another way, and you can change, that's very different than you knowing the world can be different, but it doesn't matter because it will only be so for a period of time.
Yeah.
And that's as we will continue to point out every time, is directly tied into the theme of Endwalker, which is, you take the small moments, you take these fragile joys, and you try to make the best of them, and you try to appreciate them for what they are, and you try to make the world better. And it is not a guarantee of success, but that is valuable in its own right. And to your point about Dark Souls, for me, that is my love of Dark Souls 1 comes from the idea that as dark as this universe is, and as intractable as it is, and this is true for the following games as well in a lot of ways, that there is a value to the doing for the sake of there is a value to believing and doing, right? It is not that you can change the fate of the world, but you can make things better in some small part, and that is valuable, even if it's only for fragile and for a ephemeral period of time.
Right, exactly. I think we meet Quintus now, right? After we meet Jullus, he takes us pretty quickly to meet Quintus. He takes us to the train station, right?
Yeah, so we get to the Tertium, and what I really love about it is that the music that plays, and it's interesting is the first time that music ever got used was for Whirlit, and it is technically known as, specifically the song is known as Turncliffe, I believe.
Okay.
Which is interesting to me because it's so consistently used to anything to do with the Sorrows of Garlemald. I feel like the name The Sorrows of Garlemald would have been more appropriate. Whereas now I feel like I see it and I'm like, having the Turncliff theme like literally be titled Turncliff and show up in the Garlemald is a little weird. However, it's possible that they either changed the name later or that was actually only a placeholder title and it may no longer actually be the title of the song. So I should actually double check that. But needless to say, I love that song. It's very melancholic. It's I don't know, it's not a march, but it feels almost like a dirge in and of itself. And so it's this perfect, it encapsulates this once great empire, but also the melancholy not only of its loss, but its people in general. And I think that's really great.
I mean, if you think about it, right, you put a picture of Turncliff and you put a picture of Garlemald next to each other, you could not find two more different places.
Sunshine and waters versus ice in a frozen hellscape.
Yeah, but they managed to link them through the storylines and through these musical motifs, which I think goes along with it.
Yes, and one last thing I want to point before we get to the Tertium, which is when Alphinaud and Alisaie offer themselves up to be the envoys, and you're like, I'm going to, because one of the things you can say is, what would your mother say if I let you go alone?
Yeah, I said that.
Yep.
Of course.
There's a lot of, in the Garlemald section, I feel like there's a lot of options that are, your two dialogue options are very different in tone. Like, they both get you to the same place, as always, but, another example is later on when Xenos takes over your bodies, right? You have enough Xenos versus basically get away from them, you son of a bitch.
Yeah.
Which, again, same, getting to the exact same place, but there's a lot of things like that where the you can be a little bit more joking versus not even serious. It's not even that sort of dichotomy because it changes different places, but I love it when our options are not superficial, even if they make us go to the same place.
Right, it does help you sort of build a character around your Warrior of Light, which is, people have been doing that for ages anyway, but it helps to realize that, especially for so it really helps you to realize your character in a way that's in-game. It almost feels representative of your efforts.
I will always be someone who, having a mechanical representation of that within the game itself is going to be much, much bigger to me because yes, I can rationalize it. Yes, I can create roleplay or whatever for my character outside of it, but being able to mechanically play it and enjoy it for me personally is, I don't want to say just is valuable, whereas the other isn't, but is so much more valuable to the point where that is nearly the case.
Yeah, and it's not like like you said, it's adaptive. We're not getting a Dragon Age 2 style. We don't have like a Purple Hawk, Red Hawk, Blue Hawk style choice dichotomy. It differs, it alters in tone. You're not just given angry, jokey, nice.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that I don't love Dragon Age 2, I do.
Yeah, but there's a difference between playing a BioWare RPG and playing an MMO with a dedicated crafted story that is not about changing the course of the story. It's about how you want to maybe characterize a moment, right? Like those are as much as you could compare, like, well, aren't they dialogue options? Their purpose is fundamentally different and trying to achieve different forms of fantasy.
Yeah, it's not a BioWare dialogue option. It's a very much like you said. It's not even giving the illusion of choice. I don't think that's the intent behind it. I think it's a little bit of character building. I think it's just a little hook to invest you in your character.
Yeah. And definitely, I think it absolutely does make the Warrior of Light feel more like a character.
I do, yeah, I do.
Even it just as a byproduct of the fact that your character speaks and responds to people more because you have dialogue options. Not even the choice itself, just the fact that there are choices necessitates then that the Warrior of Light will then speak.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the Warrior of Light has never been so full of personality as they have in this expansion.
Oh, it's just continued to each expansion more and more and more.
Yes.
So we meet Quintus for the first time, and my initial notes and not every topic is like this, but just for meeting Quintus is about a paragraph or two of just me being like, but this motherfucker though.
Yeah.
He's maddening. I mean, he is, right? The lengths he's willing to go for pride, the way he just does not value, and I think Alisaie or Alphinaud says it later, right? The way in which things are things and people are people, stripped of any nuance or value, and just doesn't value life because of it, is maddening. It's also, though, again, fully fleshed out. He has a fully fleshed out ideology in the limited time we have him. And so this is not to say he's not an excellently created, crafted, and powerful character. But fuck him.
Yeah, fuck him. I mean, he is willing entirely to see his people die out wholesale if they die with pride.
Yep.
Or if they die with his thick version of pride. And again, his mindset makes sense. It's rooted in Garlean sensibilities and Garlean experiences. And as an older man, he would be closer to this. He was probably alive, right, before Solus really got the Empire productive. Before Garlemald was a less miserable place to live.
Well, he would have been born as it was getting there, really. So, like, the thing is he would have been born into that world ascending, and therefore would have seen the benefits of it.
Right. I sort of imagine that even with Solus, it takes him a while to get. He starts to invent Machina, but it probably still takes a while before Garlemald is a decent place to live, even with the conquests, because the first conquest they do are full of pretty miserable lands.
Yeah.
And I would imagine, I can almost imagine this new recruit starting to see this new age dawn, in a very real way.
Yeah, well, and there's something to point out the difference in experience of, a young Quintus would have been joining the Garlean military and seeing the, not only like glory, but the benefits that would have brought to his homeland, compared to Jullus, who has watched it utterly destroy his homeland, right? And that's the inexorable fate, right? The inexorable fate of conquerors is to be destroyed by them from within or without, as opposed to attempting to break the cycle, because inevitably we have to live together. Inevitably, you can't just be if you are just a whole new cruel to the cruel that was cruel to you, it's just a cycle. It never stops, it never ceases. But at some point, if you try to make things better and try to find a way to coexist, it doesn't mean perfectly coexist. That doesn't happen. There is no perfect coexisting.
No.
But you have to find ways to coexist, else everyone will suffer. And you might have a period of time where you're ruling. You might have a period of time where you're ascendant, but not for long.
And it's not even you can't have wars, because obviously war's bad, it's evil, but it happens, in a world like Eorzea, it happens. The point is not, like you said, not to do perfect. The point is to live.
Yep. To keep trying, right? To not treat the goal as this perfect peace. What peace is not achieved by creating everlasting peace is not something that exists. And we even see it with the Edens, right? The literal Edens of the unsundered world and the conflicts that arose from it. We see it, and the fact that it eventually fell, right? We see it with the other planets. You don't create everlasting peace. Conflict is a nature of disparity. To be different is to incite a form of conflict. That does not necessitate conflict be utterly destructive. And it does not necessitate. There's a difference between a disagreement. There's a difference between debate, argument, even battle sometimes. Like the twins acknowledge that sometimes maybe war is unavoidable in certain cases. But that does not mean you cease trying to make the world better, trying to avoid it. That's the difference.
Yeah, definitely. I think... Yeah, I think even, although it does not condone it, I think even Endwalker adds a layer of intrinsic value to the experience of even these old soldiers, right? Whose lives have been war, who believe in war. They could have new life. It's not that, we don't go in there, we don't execute Quintus and his hardliners. They tell us their thoughts, and we say, okay, we hear you, come back with us anyway. Accept our charity anyway.
Literally onto the end. Literally, even after all that happens, once the counterattack is stopped, everyone still tries to go to the Tertium to still try to convince Quintus, right? And yes, will he probably be charged as a war criminal and have to face consequences because of truth? You need truth and reconciliation? Sure, but there's a difference, right? There's a difference between they are not trying to subjugate Quintus. There's just at a certain point, some people do need to be held accountable for their deeds and actions. Like that, you
Right.
have to have a sense of justice. Else, also, you cannot heal. There has to be truth and reconciliation. Otherwise, there is no healing. The wounds just fester. There's another. Speaking of wounds, Quintus has the line that I only caught, I think, the second or third time around, which is, "Due to my wounds, I may never take the field again." And that's I think to me that's important because it's easy during that scene or not that scene, but just all the scenes to assume the reason he's not taking the field is because he's a coward or because he doesn't actually believe in his ideology, or like you're like, why are you not upon the field of battle? If you're about to have a glorious charge, why are you not on the field of battle?
Right.
And understanding that he may actually be very limited in movement and ability to do anything. One, that colors his character in other contexts, but also it helped me be like, oh, I don't think you are just someone who's a complete hypocrite. You may still be, but at least not quite in the same way as like, oh, you could be out there, but you're just being like, nah, not me.
Right. Okay, so I agree, and I also have something else to add to this. So I played healer, so I was doing the healer role quest as I was doing this, and it was interesting because you see Quintus, who is a man living with a disability gained in the service of his ideals, and he gives up, obviously. He enters a very toxic spiral. And then you have Arenvald, who enters a very different type of headspace. And although he struggles with it, you see throughout the healer role quest that he is struggling.
And 5.x.
And 5.x, of course. But he finds new purpose. He finds new ways to live on. And like we've said many, many times in this series, the experience of life and the they shall walk of it all is so key to all of the themes in Endwalker. And I think that's true of this comparison that you could draw, which maybe isn't intentional between Quintus, between Arenvald.
But it's definitely there. That's a really good point. I hadn't even thought to, because it wasn't until this morning I really thought about the lines Quintus was getting at. And so I hadn't even thought to draw that juxtaposition. But that makes so much sense. And I, again, to what you're saying, whether intentional or not, juxtapositions are there to be made, right? Like that, the contrast between the two characters and the way that they deal with the world is there.
Even if not intentional, the writing is consistent.
And sometimes, you got to wonder how much of that is a byproduct of the things that are on writers' minds, whether they're aware of it or not.
Definitely. I mean, they've been immersed in this story and writing this story, this ode to hope. So I would have to think that it would be present in their minds, sort of subconsciously and consciously.
Well, and I love that you have Alice and Alphino, who have experienced war, have experienced loss, have experienced conflict, experienced all these things, and still know, not only still know exactly what they stand for, more than any point in their lives do they know what they stand for, and are they willing to stand by it in the face of such utter contempt and cynicism from Quintus and from other characters as well, as well as in the face of such rhetoric and logic as Fortuno.
Yeah, and there's almost a sense of when Quintus is talking with Alice and Alphino, and when the Garleans in general are talking to Alice and Alphino, there's almost, at least the older ones, maybe not Julius so much because he's also of a similar age, maybe a little older, I think. But there's almost this sense of patronizing of you can't really understand the hardships that Garlemald's seen, but obviously Alice and Alphino have seen the worst the world has to offer. They've lived through and come out on the other side of the toughest things that they could have possibly faced. I mean, Alize as a teenager is out there fighting Bahamut.
Right. Well, and I was about to say too, the worst that the worlds have had to offer. I mean, think about what Alice would have gone through in Amarang during her time on the first, right? Yeah. And to say nothing of even like what Alphino went through, but just like the way in which she loses people, the way in which she loses Tesleen, right? The way in which these kids have not only experienced mundane horror, but existential horror, and still have the wherewithal to know where they stand and what they hope for and what's worth fighting for.
Right, and I think we discussed this last week or in one of the previous recording sessions where we talked about how Alize and Alphino had massive character development in Shadowbringers, especially Alize, but definitely Alphino as well. And I think especially for Alizé, who was on the ground in Amareng, the chance to see a world that is, for all intents and purposes, on the verge of death, the societies that are gone and dead or just hanging on for dear life, some in very horrible conditions, of course, like most of Yulmore.
And have no path to hope.
Right, exactly. But she meets people there. She works alongside people, both of them do, who do have hope. And, in the case of Alphino, who, when shown the ways in which the system that they benefit directly from are evil, turn against the system. And then how that contrasts to Quintus, who sees the stuff that his system has done and just digs his heels in. And then like Julius, who comes much in the same way to not turn against the system, because I don't think that's quite the right term for what Julius is doing, but to recognize perhaps the ways in which the situation has been engineered by the way Garlemald's been built.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at, it starts with recognition, right, from him, and then it becomes, he is someone who can value empathy and compassion, and who can eventually reckon with why he loves the nation, what he loved about it and why he loved it, versus this is not the path to maintain it, right? That this is not the path to have his family and his world be what it was, right? You see the beginning of that at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, he recognizes, right? So the philosophy of Quintus is mirrored in this way, I think. Although it's true that, conflict is inevitable and the great wheel keeps turning and crushing people, it just keeps turning. Jullus sort of takes that to a step further. It's going to turn and it's going to crush the oppressor at some point. The whole striving for domination by strength is a path with an end.
Yep. And that, we get to Quintus, why reject us conquering you and owning you if you want peace, which is just, okay, I don't even have time to explain on how fucked that is on multiple levels. Yes, if you want peace, the best option is for us to just have the power to dominate you, because then there will be peace. It's like, okay, that fails. I'm mad because I don't want to go into an hour-long diatribe about all the ways in which that's fucked and all the ways in which that fails to miss the point. So I won't. But to just talk about it on here, believe me when I say that's fucked and that misses the point.
It's smug, and it's smug in a way that I've heard people talk about in real life. I've heard people say this about Manifest Destiny, about the British Empire, about Japanese imperialism in sort of the World War II and pre that period. I've heard people saying these things. Well, we bought stability, we bought progress.
The trains ran on time,
Oh, yeah. Oh, good old Mussolini. Obviously ironic there. But Quintus is, and a lot of the writing in this expansion, in this game in general, is a very serviceable mirror of real life. Obviously they're I don't want to say flanderized, but they're exaggerated in certain cases. But
but like, to me, that's the power of fantasy, is the ability to heighten, and narrative in general, right, is the ability to heighten in order to better cast a mirror, right? Rather than,
I think there are more grounded figures. Like Jullus feels fully grounded in reality to me. Like I could meet a Jullus right now. I could probably go to the Ukrainian front and meet a Julius right now. Quintus has that, but he's also elevated. He's also sort of caricatured isn't quite the right word, but he's definitely fantasized, which is obviously not a bad thing.
No. I will reiterate for my own sake, really, which is that heightening does not mean bad, and things have a truth value that is disconnected from whether or not they are an exact reflection of reality. And sometimes the best way to convey information about real world experiences is actually not to convey real world experiences, but narrative or heightened versions of things, because they can be better processed by people.
Yes, exactly.
So he then puts fucking slave collars on children who came to him in peace.
Yeah, he does. That was crazy, right? Because it shows to us how dark this situation is. Alphino and Alizé we know. I mean, obviously he doesn't know, but they're kids, so he could assume. But we know that they're so sweet. Alphino is so caring and so genuine, and Alice is such a little like ragamuffin, basically.
Yeah.
And to see these colors go on them, and obviously they really hammer home how inhuman to them that we, the Warrior of Light, are. Not for any racial reason, not because we're not Garleans, because we are, like I've said before, we are the Garlean invasion. We are a one-man army. We are terrifying, which is a really interesting...
We are a force of nature.
Exactly, which is a really interesting view, right? There's...
Yeah, well, and
go on.
So actually I have a question for you, which is, you get the warrior around you, the perspective of the like Garlean soldiers around you. They're terrified when they realize who you are and all that stuff. But do you think when Quintus says don't bother putting one on him, like he's like, stop, don't even touch him? Do you think Quintus fully buys into, because even Quintus has the line, you know, you're not the barbarian I thought you were. Like, he seems to also have, just like everyone else, this perspective that you are this monster. And I don't mean a monster just that you're like evil or anything from his perspective, though I'm sure you might use such terms, but more just like you are that powerful. Like he views you as, oh, don't even bother putting on him. It won't even affect them. Do you think that's even true? Or do you think in that moment, the main thing that is quote unquote protecting you is that fear that they all have?
So I think it's a bit of both, right? I think the answer is yes. He's probably being tempered in his expectations by the legend of the Warrior of Light. But I also think he's been on the battlefield long enough to recognize that we walk up to, you know, what has he got? Like, he's got like 7 in Tertius, sorry, that we see. We've got like 7 functioning guards who are all freezing to death and starving. We walk up to that on a bad day and we kill them.
Yeah.
Single-handedly.
Yep.
So it's true. I think the electric shock would hurt us. I think we would feel it. You know, we're not that far from humanity in our physicality, but our capabilities. You know, I almost thought it was like, you know, in his mind's eye, that they step forward to put a collar on us, and we, you know, grab their arm and go John Wick on the whole base. Almost it is what I had in mind for his expectations.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, how shrewd of him to know, though, it doesn't matter either way. All we need to do is threaten the children. As long as we do that, they'll comply. Which is...
It's all good, right? Because I get it. You know, when you see, for example, in the real world, with the advent of really powerful weaponry, for example, you see real nations say, okay, so to combat this, we're going to need to turn to really dark tactics. And obviously, I can't condone any of that. It's wrong. And it's wrong in this case. It's monstrous to collar children like this. But I can see why he thinks that.
Yeah, and again, I think it's very different understanding why this is shrewd and being able to look at that and, like, from a I don't want to say tactical, that gives it too much credence, but from a tactical standpoint, it's a smart decision on his part. It's unethical, it's immoral, it's wrong, but it's not like he's doing something that's super stupid that's going to hurt him. He's doing something that is going to be effective.
Yeah.
It's wrong, but it will be effective, as proven. Like, it does. It is the most effective way to control the Warrior of Light. Was not shocking us. It was threatening the twins.
He's completely right. He is right. This is the best way to deal with the Warrior of Light.
As long as he's working from his necessary assumption that he has to be in conflict with him.
Right.
That should be, like, that's the predicate, right? Is that he's the initial need for this situation is completely wrong and unnecessary.
It is. Yeah, you can see why, because the moment that we learn the location of Tertius, to his mind, it has to be like someone's just pointed a nuke at his base, right?
Yeah.
Again, I say this often, and sort of just take it from this point on. I can't condone it, but from the point that he's coming at, this cynical sort of viewpoint that conflict is innate to every person on the planet, unless you're sort of a weakling who is destined to be conquered. You can see why he's done it. It makes sense. In fact, it's the only option for him in his mind.
Then we have, sort of as the final note of that cutscene, is that you get to respond to him using one of 2 dialogue options, which is the first being because even the most bitter adversary may one day see reason, and it flashes to end itself.
Yes.
Which I loved. But the one I chose, which is the second option actually, is on the coldest, blackest of nights, meager though it may be, we share the warmth of our fire. And then it shows Horsefont,
Yeah.
which is...
I had to pick that one. I mean, it's so long ago now, and the Horsefont death is, in some ways, when you look at it logically, it's not as significant as some of the stuff in the most recent years, but it strikes right to the heart of why this game is good, right? It's a mundane loss of just a good friend. You know, Horsefont wasn't hugely important. He was just a friend. He was our friend, our first true friend outside of the Scions, I might say.
Yeah, and the thing that, to me, that what makes it such a linchpin, though, is not even the value of that line in the moment. It's not the value of just Horsefont as our friend in the moment. It's the most striking value is that those legacies of those moments matter, right? That those moments are powerful, meaningful, and, you know, oh, I hear this line and that means something to me. But that you are allowed to quote this friend, that you are throughout Shadowbringers, through I think at least one time in Stormblood, and throughout Endwalker, that their kindness, their empathy, their well wishes and meaning lives on through us and lives on in making the world better, is why Horsefont, I think, matters so much. You know, if he was that sad moment in Heavensward where he died, and, you know, a smile better suits a hero, that in and of itself is a great moment. But why it's an excellent story and why he's an excellent character is because those moments live long past. His kindness lives long past his death and affects so many others and makes the world better for it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And also, when I said that line, right, I got my own flashback. I got my own flashback to us arriving at the border of a xenophobic, closed borders nation all that time ago, and being extended mercy and being extended, you know, warmth, kindness, welcoming. It's just, it's a really good parallel for the insular mindset of the Garleans and that of the Ishgardians who came to welcome us. And obviously Horsefont was the first hand to extend. Him and Emmerich were first hands to extend out towards us. And Horsefont welcomes us into his home, into his family. You know, we find an adoptive family, pretty much, in my opinion, through Horsefont.
I think it's treated that way. And I would say, as much as Emmerich is politically and immediately like on our side, he has to hold you, and as with everyone else, at arm's length at first. And so there is a difference between the immediate jovial friendliness of a character like, you know, Horsefont versus Emmerich, who's definitely an ally and sympathetic, but that relationship has to build.
Yes.
And I think this is where 14 uses its MMO nature to its greatest strength, because it tells a story that is interwoven and interconnected and builds off of itself, but it's because there is the expansions and patch content. It is one unified story. It's not a trilogy. There's a difference between three separate stories that are in sequence, you know, Star Wars, right? Or Lord of the Rings, whatever you want to use.
Mm-hmm.
They're all one greater story, yes, but there's three books, right? Or three movies. And while there are, depending on how you want to count it, X number of expansions, they all immediately flow into each other as one long narrative. And so when they play off of each other, there's also a difference of cadence and kind compared to certain other things.
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely true. It is, yeah, no, I get what you mean. I definitely do get what you mean there.
So then we go on quests with Jullus, sort of trying to collect the ceruleum.
Yes.
We're trying to collect the ceruleum from scrounging from scrapped machines. We realize that there's probably ceruleum in the tanks that kept the waters for the fountains warm.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, yeah, but we're not going in there because we'll die. And everyone looks at each other and is like, let's do this, and like dives and goes and grabs it.
Yeah, that scene is the core of this story to me. The pool scene, the pond scene, is the heart of Garlemald, the whole Garlemald thing to me.
Yeah, I might broaden it up to some of the following scenes as well, up until you arrive at his house a little bit later on. But I agree. And the fact that a lot of it's done without a cutscene, I think, is really cool. The fact that it's not this long cutscene of you doing there, it's you actually progressing the quest.
Yes. And it did genuinely make me wince, right? The thought of having to dive in temperatures that cold in this muddy pool, like it's gritty. I mean, obviously, the Warrior Blights killed gods, but I don't know about that.
Yeah, it was like -2 degrees Fahrenheit here the day that I played that. So I was literally thinking about like stepping outside and jumping in water. And I was just like, oh, no.
And there's no shelter, right? So like you know the wind chill and the cold after that in perpetuity.
Honestly, the biggest suspension of disbelief issue I have in all of Endwalker is the ease with which everyone in that group is handling the cold.
Yeah.
I'm like, the Laminsons are not doing this well. I don't care what they're all suffering.
Oh, think about the Eldans, right? You know, you've got like the Popaters
Oh
there.
my god.
They must be freezing. They must be just using thaumaturgy to heat themselves at all times.
Well, you gotta wonder though, if you're doing that, are you wasting your own aether, and is that then making it harder to like stay warm?
Yeah.
I guess you're pulling ambiently, you wouldn't have to worry as much. But then we get a stealthy fucker Thancred showing up.
Yes. We should have expected that.
Yeah. Which is also a good use of, like, again, using characters at different moments that makes really good contextual sense. Like, yeah, you would have Thancred doing that with his skills and his abilities. And the fact that the Sabardian contingent, he says that we saw the twins with the collars, and we were like, yeah, we figured out what's just people being smart and being able to piece information together without make educated guesses and be right.
Yeah, I mean, not only is Thancred obviously an expert in many matters, but you think about it, like Lucia was an intelligence agent basically for Garlemald. She would know these tactics. This is probably not the first time the Garleans had done it.
That's a really good point.
So she would know the darker tactics of Garlemald, I would imagine, when it comes to controlling people.
Yeah, and then Jullus seems to think that there won't necessarily the question is posed, like, what is going to happen when Cerulean here runs out from scrounging? Like, what's your plan then? And my question is, some of the side quests show that the people who ran the platforms, like the oil rigging platforms for Cerulean, are still around, and if they could get them up and running again. So the world's supply of Cerulean is not necessarily just screwed. But that said, it's not a renewable resource, so people are going to have to figure out something in the long run.
That's true. It is true, but also true of real life, right? You know, I mean...
Yeah, notice how we're struggling with that.
Yeah. I think that the reason they're not controlling it in the moment is obviously the fact that they can't extend their zone of control out that far and keep the rigs safe and the people on them safe.
Oh, yeah. I'm not surprised that it's not in use, or it's not, like, they haven't been bothering... It's to get it up and running currently. Like, with things as they are, I understand it. One of the things that I'm just curious about is, are all forms of flight switched to aether-based methodologies in order to deal with the fact that there's not necessarily going to be unlimited cerulean forever?
It's the age of the Excel, baby.
Well, but the Ixali technology, all of their flight blimps are able to be buoyant by cerulean gas.
Oh, don't they use windstones as well?
That's for propulsion. The thing that's actually keeping them aloft is cerulean gas in the blimps themselves.
Oh, someone needs to introduce them to light gases. I'm sure they exist in XOV, even if the elemental table isn't such a thing. We have iron. We can definitely find them a light gas.
Quick, everyone, find the helium.
Yeah, exactly. The Loprits can probably make it for us.
Oh, you know, this is a rabbit hole we cannot get into.
A rabbit hole.
But does the element... God damn it, Ninja. But does the elemental table exist in any meaningful way? You know, the periodic table of elements exists in any meaningful way in the Final Fantasy XIV universe? I would argue no.
No.
That fundamental physics as it exists operates under aetherology and, aspects of aether.
Look, when I was writing the bestiary section of the Western Thanalan article, I was looking... Every single kobold in Western Thanalan, this is so annoying, drops a different type of metal than their name is. Like, there isn't like a copper kobold that drops copper. No, they drop tin or something. And I'm just like, no, why? So no, I don't think the periodic table exists. No way.
Yeah, it just... Here's the thing. If it does, it breaks everything, so I hope it doesn't.
No, it's just expressions of of how the world works, of how different factors combine with not anima, sorry.
Aether.
Yeah, Aether.
Yeah, and expressions of Earth Aether for different, minerals and all that jazz. So we return to the Tertium, and we get the lines from one of the other Garlean soldiers who's standing there with. For savages, they seem pretty docile, and that is like, oh, that's a. And then he also basically says, "I'm just joking" afterwards, which is also like, oof. Oh, that's not okay.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Oh, a little aside here, just on the topic, I just remembered this. So it's sort of implied by Copperbell Mines that copper is linked to lightning aether. So maybe maybe it's like different aether combining with earth aether to create ore.
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
But yeah, no, it's another thing that's true to life, right? Someone saying something horribly racist and then saying, "Oh, but I'm just kidding," though.
Yeah, not to say I'm necessarily sympathetic, but I understand the reflex, but I don't understand how that is going to anyway make it better. Like, at least commit to it if you're going to say it.
I think the only way it's made better is via a lack of fundamental empathy in these people, in other, others in outgroups, which has been sort of inculcated by Garlean propaganda. Yeah. And I was seeing, I remember reading your notes on this a while ago, and seeing that you were talking about the beast tribes. And as I was writing this Western Townland stuff, I see there's a quest where a group of goblins that have been kicked out of Uldar as part of the discriminatory laws against beast tribes, finger brackets, the tribes.
Mm-hmm.
These goblins have left Uldar not through any choice of their own, been robbed of their property by the sounds of it, and have settled in Hammerlair, which is the area that's being sort of prepared for the luxury resort, luxury estate of the new nobility, because they don't want to look at the refugees anymore, so they want to move out of the city. And there's a quest where you kill them because they're sabotaging the hammers.
Yep.
In this area, they've been sort of forced out to squat. And it's a really interesting view of how the game's matured and how we can look to solve these issues back home. I think we have space now that we've dealt with the Ascian threat for now, and the world-ending threat of Fandaniel as well. I think we have space to explore the relationships with the beast tribes further, especially now that we're sort of, obviously the goblins weren't widely tempered anyway, but now that we're sort of starting to see these barriers break down, there are things for the city-states to answer for, and obviously for the beast tribes. Oh, I need to stop calling them that. For the tribes to answer for as well.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different things I want to talk about with that, but one thing I'll say is one thing I really love that they're changing from beast tribes to tribes for the quests.
I love it.
I love that they're doing it. What I love just as much as that they're doing it is that they are not doing it until you hit Endwalker, because it is an important part. That failure, that othering, it is so inculcated in even the societies you are a part of and your character is a part of for the beginning of the game, and growing past it is part of the narrative. If you just pretend like it was never there, what happens is you have new generations who do not learn from the mistakes of the past. You can't just ignore the mistakes of the past. You must learn from them.
Right, exactly.
Otherwise, it just happens again.
Yeah.
And so that's something I was really worried about when they were going to change. I heard they were going to change. I was really excited because, I've made videos and talked at length about the fundamental misnomer and the fundamental problem with the notion of beast tribes. But I was worried about retconning the past, because that's literally one of the major A plots in a lot of parts of the MSQ. But a B plot throughout all of the MSQ is the relationship with the beast tribes and the evolution of that and progression of that. And that's, for instance, why it matters so much when they show up in 5.x, right? The fact that the Grand Company of Eorzean is not just the city-states. It is the city-states and all of the tribes. It is everyone uniting because you have earned those relationships. And then the tribe quests they're so a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tale that's it's been told since, I can't speak for 1.0, but since 2.0, it's a tale that's been told in both Encyclopedia Eorzeas, in the tribe quest. Well, the beast tribe quests, because they were beast tribe quests at the time, through our interactions in the MSQ with them, in Shadowbringers, in in Stormblood, even to a lesser degree in the expansions previous to that. It's been a journey that's been building, and interestingly, I noticed as it was happening that over time the community was starting to get a more like, you would never see someone comment on the name Beast Tribes back in Stormblood, like in the general community, like in the roleplay community, in the writers, in sort of the lore focused communities, you would, but you started to see that leach out more and more now. And now if someone talks about it on Reddit, for example, this will get brought up. So they've really over time ingrained this concept in people, that this humanizing, which isn't quite the right word, because from the first time you meet the Beast Tribes properly in 2.0, they are humanized, they are shown to be people, but this meta humanization, right, this gradual
unothering,
yeah, exactly, this gradual, not change in the narrative, but this gradual shift towards exposing what has happened to the beast, to the tribes, to these people. Now we just need to find the last living Hecatoncheires in Copperbell and rehabilitate them, please God.
Ooh, I wish that would I don't know how you get past 300 years of
living underground and eating worms. It's pretty bad.
Yeah, because you were enslaved by a peoples. That said, that would be, that I would love for that to be a narrative arc or a side quest or something. I definitely would be part and parcel to that. And to a point that's throughout this Garlean section that we talked about earlier, that's a sort of example, though, of maybe not even that as much, but that not everyone is going to want to meet you halfway. And so, like, for instance, the Gygus, right, are not necessarily going to want to work with the grand companies of Eorzea. And there's a difference between leaving well enough alone and being able to, like, be like, okay, if we try to engage too much, we're going to come into conflict with each other, but we're going to, like, try to maintain peace, right? It's not that you're going to get everyone who wants to actively meet you halfway, but that's different than actively seeking to conquer or enforce your ideology upon others.
Right, exactly. And I mean, there's something to be said. We don't need to, if, for example, the Ixal up in Zelphatol, I think there's a rationale for sort of relocating them because it sucks up there. But if they want to be, but if they didn't want to have contact with the Eorzean societies, then you could allow them the space to, have the resources they need and set up a secure body. You don't need to be attacking them. You don't need to be pushing constantly to have contact with them. And I think, we're going to see this. We might even see it conceived of as a nation. You might see the nation of Zelphatol. You might see the nation of Pagalthan, the nation of Ugomero. Stuff like that start to emerge as they're sort of equalized.
That's a really cool idea, and I would be super behind that as well. And that's also going to then play into really interesting whenever we have to contend with what amounts to New Garlemald.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that, right? I was actually thinking about that earlier because I was thinking with these legions and even just like sub-legion organizational structures that are out in the world, they're everywhere, right? They're all over the world. I could see them almost going in like an ancient Rome way. So when Rome pulled out of England, for example, or when it lost its territories in sort of southern Germany and France, a lot of the soldiers were left behind, and they gradually sort of merged with the local population to create like pseudo-Latinized communities and stuff like that. I think you could maybe see that, like Garlean groups moving into villages with other groups who were previously under Garlean control, and you could play out like a really interesting story of humanization and of building bridges through that.
Yeah, I'm really excited I think that's possible. I think I'm very excited to see which way it's gone with. And I don't know if what's going on with Garlemald, the Garleans and New Garlemald, or whatever goes on with that, is going to be just a constant B plot throughout like the next couple of expansions. If it's going to be an A plot, I'm happy to see. I'm like, I don't need it to be any specific thing, but I'm very, very curious to see how that all goes down.
I think we'll see different communities, right? I think maybe in this expansion we'll see settlement plots for the beginnings of a new Garlemald. I think we'll see Garlean refugees in Thavner and Sharlayan, wherever else you want to sort of like see it. I think when we get to the New World, I think there's a good chance that we see a Neo Garlemald thing there. I think it just seems like fertile ground for it.
Well, and there's multiple legati that we don't have, legions that we aren't accounted for. And so you could absolutely see that one of them has been on the New World or Mericidia, and it would also make sense for why they never showed up as things were falling apart.
Yeah, we need to see the 10th Legion so that you can get your FF10 fix.
Well, but they do get the 10 does get referenced for this one. So we know that 10's accounted for. The ones that aren't accounted for, I believe, are 2, 5, 6 is in Heaven's Word. 2, 5, 8. No. 8 gets a reference. I think it's 2, 5, 9. I think that's it.
Do we get the 13th? Yeah, we do.
We do, don't we? Yeah, now I'm forgetting.
I'm really interested to see the 9th, but that's because I'm a FF9 stan.
Yes, I'm excited for you, if nothing else. It turns out the 9th got sent back in time, and we're actually at Mach.
Nice. Well, don't even offer me that.
Well, then it explains why they're dealing with Ozma.
Good point. Okay. Clap. And then we see Legatus Kuja, who's like driven insane, and he's got a tail now, I guess. The 10th Legion, we hear about them, right? But we don't meet their Legatus. We know that they have elements in Garlemald, but we don't really.
Yes.
I feel like we don't really see the true heart of a Legion until we see the Legatus, right? Or until we start to come up against them.
To your point, I would love to see. What I would love is like we go into Corvos and like our main touch point for any form of like former legati are it would be like the 10th Legion's legati because we know that they're in that region and present.
It would be really. Who do you think it is? Do you think it's a Seymour parallel?
Oh fuck! Now you have me thinking about that. Okay, it has to be, right?
It's got to be Seymour.
Because the thing is, though, is that the closest that we have currently is the Seymour parallel within 14 is in some certain arguable aspects. There's parallels between him and Xenos, but we don't have anyone quite like him.
No, we don't.
Also, there's a lot you could get. There's a lot of really. It seems like 10th Legion was relatively reasonable compared to some of the other legions. Like they didn't seem to get super involved with the Civil War, and they came in and were like, "Hey, we don't care what the fucking ideology is. We're gonna talk to the Eorzeans and work with them and get this solved."
Yes,
and that matches. Other than the like nihilism that Seymour shows later, the initial face and the initial understanding you have of Seymour, that kind of like matches. So I could imagine like a first half of Final Fantasy X Seymour being the legati, less so than the like second half. Because the second half is nihilistic. Second half is already like taken care of in Endwalker with like a bunch of different characters.
What if we get there and the Legatus is dead and it's been taken over by the Beastmaster from Boja, who's obviously Jax.
Oh fuck!
What's his name again? Leon.
Lion or Leon.
Yeah.
Look, I'll take any more Final Fantasy X. Just give me more.
Yeah, me too. Definitely.
And I do want you to have your 9. And I'm also interested to see what 9 would do because some of the more interesting aspects of 9 are already kind of philosophically dealt with during Endwalker around like experience, existence, inevitable death, nihilism, that sort of stuff.
I wonder if we get a 9 thing that's focused on what makes a person and mortality, and stuff like that, like the Vivi and Kuja plot of mortality and of stuff like that.
Well, it's funny. That's what I meant to get at with the Vivi and Kuja, and that why I felt like Endwalker touched on that. But I do think you're right in that there is a larger flavor to some of the quandaries those two are going with. That is not just about what is the meaning of existence, but what is the meaning of mortality?
Yes. It's going to be interesting to see what they name the antagonist of that plot, because Garland is done. Garland's dealt with.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure they'll either come up with something or they'll figure it out.
They will. Necron or something, I don't know.
Quintus uses the ceruleum. You get him on armor rather than helping his people. So, fuck him yet again.
Typical Quintus, right? I mean, like I said, Quintus is happy to see his people burn if it gets him his shallow, pale pride.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we touched on a lot of the things around this moment. The survival instead of thriving, but not even really surviving, and no plan for the future, only killing for the moment.
Yeah.
And then I love that we have Jullus at his home, and you understand not just what he lost in Garlemald, but what he went through, having to literally kill his own family.
Right, when they get tempered, yeah.
And you're realizing that you're finding him in like the lowest point of his life on a number of levels.
Oh yeah, hugely. Like the lowest point, lower than he could have ever imagined. I would imagine that he could get.
Yeah.
What hasn't he lost?
And the fact it also makes more sense that he'd give himself over to Quintus or the idea of Garlean pride, because what else does he possibly have?
Yeah. I mean, he the only thing he has is Quintus, right? Is his respect for Quintus.
Yeah. And we have at the same time what is probably one of the most powerful scenes in the. There's a lot of different. No, I don't say most powerful scene. It's one of the many powerful scenes in the game, which is Alice and Alfino imprisoned and together. And I love the juxtaposition that we get in that scene as it cuts it back and forth between different things. But I love one of the things that's funny about that scene is it opens with Alice kicking the door really half-heartedly and just goes, "It's no use." And I'm just like, you didn't even try.
It's classic Alice. They've got a really good sense. I mean, they always have to a degree, but like back in 2.0, it wasn't so sure. But they have the writing team has such a clear sense of these characters, right? Of every little detail of them, and it's just such a breath of fresh air coming from an MMO like WoW, for example, where you have the whole Gorosh storyline, where he just is changing character every different zone that you go to.
It's deceptively hard to like. You can think you have a good idea of a character, but that's very different than being able to maintain that idea and also tell the narrative you want to. Because a character may not necessarily do the thing you want them within the confines of the narrative.
Definitely.
And still be that character. And so the twins are talking together, and it's just this great perspective on their actions in the past, their beliefs, a reflection on the Empire and on Sharlayan, and a refutation of the not even quite pragmatism, but just like a lot of the philosophies they had come to, and a frustration when we live to fill up to their lofty standards, what place do we have in their world is one of the lines that they have. And this frustration that, it's so easy for you to look down upon us, trying our damnedest to make the world, to do something for the world, when it's so easy to just be cynical and say, nope, it's fucked up, and that way I don't have to do anything, or everything is simple, it's black or white, and therefore I don't have to think.
Right, exactly. It's the conflict between the opinions of the sort of the established who are set in their ways now, and this new youth that can see a brighter future and is willing to fight for it. And almost in a very odd way, it's the philosophy of the Scions is almost, and I do mean this in a very odd way, almost a melding of Sharlayan and Garlean thought. It's taking
action and inaction.
Exactly. It's taking the impetus of Garlemald and applying it to peace and the temperance of Sharlayan and knowing when to act.
Yes. And also never failing to regard humanity, and I know that can be loaded and mean greater or lesser things, but humanity, compassion, empathy, and the sanctity of life. Let's say the value of life. Fundamentally assuming that the value of life is valuable, period. Because it either is or it isn't. You can't selectively treat life as valuable, really.
No, right.
And so it either is or is not, and never forsaking that it is. And that even can come up against complications we have later, right, where Fortunal and his plan with the Ark is not going to be able to save everyone, and he's not going, it's okay, but he's just saying, he's like, look, I'm just going to try to save as many as I can because that's what I feel I can do.
Yes, yeah.
And so it's not as simple as just, Fortunal doesn't value life. It's just that he's more willing to concede the best outcome for the safer, good outcome.
Yeah, and I think on the topic of that, and we'll discuss that in great detail, I'm sure, when the time comes, but the willingness to take a chance on, what's the opposite of pragmatism? Idealism. On the idealism of a youth. Something Quintus was not able to do even to the end. But Fortunal, although he's set in his ways, does shift when he sees the willingness to help, the ability to help. I mean, when we show these things to Quintus, he just is completely shut off. I actually think Fortunal and Quintus are quite good foils in this story.
Yes, and I love that in this scene they're giving comparisons about how they both have had the tendency to reduce things down to a stone is a stone, a man is a man, a flower is a flower. They like obliterate the nuance in their views, and yet they are also foils, both for each other's ideologies and the twins. And
Definitely.
That's really fascinating. What is, I think, really exemplative in Quintus's view, right, is that his outlook does not care about a future given on to new people. His outlook is not. He cares about Garlemald as an idea, but doesn't give a crap about the children of the future. Does not care about what their experience. Does not try to offer them a better world.
When you surrender yourself, like he has, and I mean this in the most condemnational terms possible, when you surrender yourself to the kind of philosophy that Quintus has, what better world is there in his mind? I mean,
Yeah,
he's thought himself into a corner where there is no good future. There is only war. There is only the endless grinding of the wheel. It's false thought. I believe the narrative says, I'm sure that you agree with me, it's wrong, and that Alphinaud and Alizé, and even Fortunaud through his change, show us that this is wrong, that progress can be made, that we can strive for better.
yes, and you're absolutely right. I do fully agree. And that a backward step is not a proof that the thing cannot work. It is just yet one more thing to be overcome on the path towards making things better.
Yeah, even if we'd gotten Quintus to live longer and come with us, he would have seen, I don't know, someone throw a rock at a Garlean on the street, and he would have been right back at the place where he started. I don't think there was any helping him.
There are some people who are stuck. There are some people who are. There are some people you cannot help. There are some people you cannot save. But there's also, again, like we were saying, that there's still a value to trying.
Exactly.
Because you may be wrong. But there also, on a lighter note, Elfino has the line, "In my misbegotten youth." I'm just like, you are like, at best, you are 18, you motherfucker. Like, what are you? In my misbegotten youth.
It's so in character for Alphinaud to say that.
Oh my god, it is absolutely appropriate for him to say it and say it that way. But I was just like, you little shit.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's a very teenage thing to say as well.
Yeah. I also love that Alizé has a profession that she genuinely believes the world going forward is going to need people like him. Like she knows that there's always going to be need for doers and actors upon the stage like her, and Alfino is too. But she knows that the diplomats are going to be needed for what comes next.
Yes,
and I really like that because I think it's clear foreshadowing for 6.x onwards, but I also think it's something that even just in that moment feels meaningful, without necessarily to say anything. It also shows that, I mean, not that they need to say it anymore, but that she believes in the world that comes next, right?
Right.
She is looking to the present to solve its problems, but is also knowing that a future is to come.
And she can speak, of course, from a position of having seen all sides of this story, more sides than Quintus could ever hope to. Whole world's perspectives on it. And also, I think I do agree that we're going to see more of this going forward. I think also with our theorized pseudo-retirement of the older scions, of the old generation, we're going to see them start to step into positions of leadership as well.
And I love that Alfino also has the line, "You found your own reasons to fight," which is really important because not only is that a thing throughout Alice's story, but especially when we first really meet her in Binding Coils, right? That's the whole real point of that narrative. I mean, it's drawing to a close Bahamut and Louis Sua's story, but also from Alice's perspective, it's about her finding reasons to fight for the world and fight for the betterment for people that aren't just her taking on her grandfather's convictions.
Right.
And so that is a thing that's resonant without knowing anything about Binding Coils, but having just written that whole thing about Binding Coils, seeing that line come back, and such an important line for her and her narrative, was really a great touch.
Yeah, I loved it. I love Alizé, and obviously I've done my own articles and stuff on Binding Coil. I think it's a really fantastic raid series as well. Gameplay wise and story wise, although it's less explicit than some of the other ones perhaps. But I am so glad that they chose to go back in. What is it? When do we see Alizé come back into the main story?
3.x.
Right, I thought it was, yeah. And I'm so glad that they go back and get her, that they retrieve Alizé from sort of the depths of raid tiers and they bring her into the main story, because she gets good character development in the raid, but the moment you throw her into the MSQ, she generates, just like by being there, development for herself, for her brother, for the other scions.
She comes into 3.x so much more fully formed than she, like, even like Binding Coil makes her a character, because she's really just not in A Realm Reborn, basically. And so Binding Coil, for me, I think of it as, here is it, we actually have a starting point for this character. And then 3.x, she actually gets to like come in. Obviously the character is going to grow a metric crap ton from where she starts in 3.x.
Yeah.
But there's just a very clear sense that there is a character there.
Yes, and I think she's been hugely successful. I mean, everyone loves Alizé, right? She's like, she is the only one that's come anywhere near knocking Y'shtola off her pedestal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a deep well of love for her. Hey all, Elioux here after the fact. This and the next 2 episodes were actually recorded this March, but with many things going on with life and the channel, Endtalkers was on the back burner for a little bit. New episodes will now be more regular and concurrent with new content, but if we fail to mention things going on in 6.1 for the next few episodes, that's why. With all that said, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I, along with Niniri, will see you next time. This content was brought to you by the Eorzean Archives. If you enjoyed this video, help us please the 12 by leaving a like and subscribing for new content every Thursday, and comment down below with any topic you'd like to see our Archons cover in the future. For even more content, discussion, and exclusives, please check out our Discord and consider supporting us on Patreon.